that the shoe launch has come in the midst of the RNC, so you know that there are many visitors who are acquiring as much Donald Trump merch as they possibly can, and these shoes may be the centerpiece of your Donald Trump merch collection. So if you're in the middle of it, run, don't walk, to get these sneakers that, again, have the ugliness of a blood-spattered face and the phrase, fight, fight, fight. They have them there on the shoe, memorialized for all time.
Nice.
Indeed.
The Mark Thompson Show.
He is one of the great legal analysts you will ever hear. A favorite across the English-speaking world. You can hear him on British radio, British television. Fox News Channel uses him. They use him in New York. They use him in San Francisco, in Los Angeles. He is a regular guest on media outlets across the world. New Zealand, Australia. So I mention it all because I'm so delighted and proud that he spends time with us every Thursday. How about it for the great former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney, David Katz, everybody.
Great to be with you, Mark.
Hello, sir. I don't hear... Yeah, great to see you, David. And, you know, we spent a lot of time in the last months talking about Donald Trump, and I'm happy to talk about whatever legal cases affect Trump, and I think there's some spillover. I would like to get to, like, for example, the special counsel. But I wonder if we could spend a second on something else that happened, and that is the guilty verdict in that Bob Menendez trial. You know, he was stuffing the gold bars and the cash and the Mercedes in the driveway type thing, and he and his wife were both indicted. He was found guilty. And I wonder if you could speak to that case and if there was anything that stood out about that case to you.
Well, the case of Senator Bob Menendez in federal court, which just resulted in him being found guilty, I think, of all the charges. So that's unanimously by all the jurors. The trial was in New York City. It was kind of interesting, Mark, because it should have been a really high-profile, much-noticed case. But it happened at the same time as the Trump trial was going on in New York City. So one of the funny things was that the motorcade of Trump's went right by the courthouse where Senator Menendez probably happily was getting less attention than he would have otherwise. And then, of course, while the jury arguments were going on, the closing arguments, and while the jury was deliberating, that gets us into the period after the debate, the run-up to the Republican National Convention, the assassination attempt over the weekend, the start of the RNC. So his case actually didn't get the kind of attention that you think that it would have. He's only the seventh senator in United States history to be convicted, only the seventh. One was in the Abscam case that my judge in Washington, D.C. had handled, one of the congressional defendants in that case. There was also a senator named Williams, who, believe it or not, was also from New Jersey, who was found guilty in that case. But only 7 senators in American history. He's the only one to ever be convicted, Menendez, of being a foreign agent. And this is not treason, this is not espionage, but my God, he was found guilty by a jury of being an agent, not for the United States, but an agent for a foreign power, namely Egypt. So it was very significant. He had a wife who was very sick, it turned out, sick enough that the trial was severed. So her trial is going to go later. That gave him the opportunity. You know, cynics always say about criminal defense attorneys that whatever the defense might have been otherwise, if someone else is not there, the other dude did it. Whoever's not in the courtroom, that's who did it. So he did point the finger at his wife and say that she had a bunch of associates. Maybe she was doing something illegal with them. She ran with this dangerous crowd, but he was so in love with her, he turned a blind eye. You know, love will make you foolish. Even if you're smart enough to be the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The jury didn't buy it. The jury thought that he was in on it. But he had a whole story, right, for the jury, Mark, that the money came from somewhere else. It was well, the money he kept because he had a complex that he was so worried he was going to get expropriated the way his family supposedly had been in Cuba. He thought that might happen to him, so he better have tens of thousands of dollars of cash at the ready, stashed away, and that the gold bars didn't have to do with him. They had to do with her. But they had a pretty good case on him, Mark, and so he was found guilty. And now you say, okay, what's going to happen now? And it's an interesting situation because the Democrats only have a very small operating margin in the Senate, right? They need Sinema, they need Manchin. They don't get those two. Then I think it's 50-50. They can do something with the vice president. But if he resigned, at least until someone replaces him, if they don't get Sinema and Manchin, they lose every vote, 50-49, without Menendez. The Democratic governor apparently wants to put his wife in that seat for a while. And so I think that one of the things Menendez is going to say, what I would advise him to say if he said to me, I don't want to resign the seat, but I need some talking points. I think one of his talking points is that, look, there's a guy who actually won the primary named Congressman Kim. He should be put in the seat if anyone's going to be put in the seat. But my goodness, the governor's wife tried to get that seat. She failed. Now they're going to vault her into my seat. This is all a political, this is all more, they say I'm the political machinations of New Jersey. This is more political machinations. I'm not resigning. But, they might turn right around and say, okay, they will put Kim in the seat. Or they might say, look, stop with the BS, okay? You were found guilty by the jury. If you don't resign fast, we'll expel you from the Senate. I don't know. They might not make that precedent. So I'm not sure Menendez is really going to go. I think Menendez may hang on for a while. To the argument that, well, he's got a right to appeal. Everyone has a right to have their appeal respected. And, in some situations we say, well, my goodness, there hasn't been an appeal, and we get pretty confident the appeal is going to go one way or the other. But I don't see where he has any really good appellate issues. I don't think people like Leader Schumer think he has any great appellate issues. So I think their argument is that you really need to resign right now. And if you don't, they're threatening to expel him.
Now, just to remind everyone, it's a little like president, isn't it? David Katz, you can tell me, just as you can be president, even if you're a felon, you can be a congressperson or senator in this case, even if you're a felon.
Well, I think a lot of the framers really were geniuses, and even geniuses, don't think through all the 19 chess moves ahead. So, no, you can't vote for the president or a senator in many states under many circumstances if you're a felon, but you can vote for a felon for president, and you can vote for a felon for senator. The idea is that if, it's ruled by the people, there's only certain conditions, mainly age, being natural born citizen. And if I'm not sure for a senator, you even need to be a natural born citizen. You do for president. And a period of residency in the United States. So if you meet those senatorial qualifications like the presidential ones, Mark, one of them is not that you not be a felon. And you can say, the people who criticize, let's say, the New York City verdict against Trump, you could say that people could cook up felonies, right? Charge something as a felony just to interfere with elections, just to handicap, right, or hobble their political opponent. And if the people want to vote for him, in fact, that's one of Menendez's arguments. This is not Menendez's first rodeo. He was charged criminally by the Department of Justice in federal court. He had a hung jury, and then the Department of Justice decided not to continue to prosecute him. That was 8 or 9 years ago. And he's been elected to the Senate since he had that baggage. So one of the arguments is they knew they had a guy with a lot of baggage. Yeah, he's got a lot more baggage. But I think he's finally done. I think Menendez is finally done.
I want to move. There are many people are saying, meantime, there are people who are in prison for, so much less than this. But the prison part of it or the sentencing part of it comes in October, I think. And by the way, just because we're on that, David, I've always been wanting to ask you this.
Go ahead.
What is the reason, or maybe the reason's not important, but let me just ask you why the sentencing for, let's say, in the case of Menendez, why is it set for so many months in the future? I always have been struck by sometimes, the judge's sentence has the sentence hearing, just before Christmas. I was like, well, why are we waiting so long?
In the federal courts, there's something called the Probation Act. And so they write a biography about you. You think of some of the famous people who've been through the system, people like Michael Milken. Who's the one who's always on with Snoop Dogg? That's not how she's going to be remembered.
Martha Stewart, yeah.
Martha Stewart. So there have been some people like that, and there's a biography done of all of them. In fact, the financial statements alone that have to be obtained about someone like Michael Milken before he gets sentenced in the federal court, The idea is you want to do a thorough understanding of the defendant. You want to figure out what would be the best placement for the defendant, whether it be a high security prison, a minimum security, or under very extenuating circumstances, maybe a halfway house type of setting. Those are always controversial when it's someone rich and the case is about a lot of money. I don't know if you remember, but Martha Stewart ended up actually serving some time in a federal prison camp. And then she spent some time on home detention. And people said home detention has a whole different meaning for Martha Stewart than for somebody else. She had grounds the size of Central Park, right, as part of her home detention. And I've had clients who are on home detention. And one of them told me, wow, this was great. You know, I got a pool table. I could play pool. My friends could come over. I didn't have a curfew. I mean, the curfew was you'd be home by a certain time. But the whole idea that it's a big lollipop to serve this federal time, it's not a big lollipop, although we have to talk about the fact that Peter Navarro woke up in federal prison and that evening spoke to the Republican National Convention. That was just yesterday. Woke up in federal prison in Miami. And then when he said how awful federal prison was, and it's terrible, you know, you're separated from your family, from other people, you don't have liberty, you have to follow the orders, maybe you have some dangerous people there with you. Although Michael Milken said that the worst thing about serving time was that everybody pounded him for investment advice all day long and told him schemes that they wanted Milken to invest in. It was apparently nonstop being huckstered by the other white collar inmates. But anyway, it's not a pleasant circumstance. But I think in response to Peter Navarro saying how terrible his white collar prison was, and like I said, it's no picnic. But they said you could get butter pecan ice cream at the commissary.
Albert, find me a picture of Peter Navarro speaking to the RNC last night. I noticed it too. I couldn't listen to it because I was on the air in Los Angeles, but I saw it, and it just his image is just it makes me crazy because he is such an unapologetic, lawless guy. I mean, his plans for overturning the election, he was sharing on MSNBC. You know, I mean, the denial of the legitimacy, and you know, this is our plan. And there he was. He's just a fire-breathing dragon. And there he was last night.
He introduced his fiancée, and he said something like, "She served the time with me," which I don't think he went to a coeducational federal prison. I assume he meant that she came at the visiting time and visited him.
Yeah, I took it metaphorically, which is sort of like, you know, when I was on ice and in a way put us on ice, but she stayed with me. She waited. It was hardly like a 9-year sentence where she had to wait until he gets done to get out. It was a 90-day sentence.
Well, you know, Mark, this is the world that I've lived in as a white-collar criminal defense attorney. I've seen it all. You know, somebody out in the desert serving time, and I went out there to handle his appeal. And he was very jittery talking about his appeal. And I kept saying, well, I've got this issue. And I tried to explain. He says, no, I hired you because you're so good. I got it covered. I got it covered. You got it covered. And we went through kind of quickly. And then I said, are you in a hurry? He said, well, yes, if I don't get down to the softball field, I'm not one of the 9 who gets to play. And so you could joke about that part of it. But then I went there another time to see him and his wife, her stand by your man woman, if ever there was one. And she drove their old jalopy out there past Mojave to the desert and came to visit him every single weekend, stood by her man. And,
wow. She didn't just come out to see him play softball?
Some divorce attorney said to me, you know, you have such a good practice, Mr. Katz. Why don't you ever send me any divorce business? I said, my guys don't get divorced, especially if the spouse perceives that what they were doing for the family, you know, not to spend on another woman, right? That's
sure.
what I've seen. That's what I've seen for years as a criminal defense attorney, this kind of stand by your man attitude. But it was quite a rogues gallery at the RNC. I just glanced at it, but I saw Manafort. And when I saw Manafort, I said, I'm gonna completely lose my mind. Manafort's somebody, you know, because he got his pardon.
Yeah, no, it was a pardon fest.
They were all there. It looked like club fed, right? It looked like prison camp fed, kind of transferred over to the RNC in Milwaukee. By the way, I'm in Milwaukee a lot because my wife is from Wisconsin. So I'm arriving in that airport. And Milwaukee's a lovely city. It has a beautiful art museum, if anyone's in Milwaukee, and a beautiful lakefront.
And well, this is not the week to be there. The security
but I was just to say, this is not the week to be there.
I want to move on to something else, which is the special counsel situation, because Judge Cannon, who was the handpicked Trump judge in Florida handling the document case, she went against decades of precedent by higher courts, suggesting that in her ruling that the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel was illegitimate. And she threw out the indictment of Trump in that classified documents case. And first, you can speak, I think you've touched on it, but you can speak to the appeal possibilities, et cetera. But I want to really address the broader issue of special counsels. And I want to get to Hunter Biden, who was also prosecuted by a special counsel. So if this special counsel illegitimacy, which was first really hinted at by Clarence Thomas in a gratuitous reference that he made in his court opinion, if this is really upheld, then Hunter Biden could, I would think, get off the hook because his special counsel falls into the same category.
Well, he could. Where to start? Cannon's 93-page, I think it was, opinion is not worth the paper it's printed on. It's not worth any of the 93 pages that she wrote. One of the things that, and we've talked about this ad infinitum, but ad nauseum, maybe for some people, with the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, having filed in the Southern District of Florida, he not only took 1 in 3 chances of getting Cannon, but another thing I don't think that he'd really thought through, he and his team, was that there was not precedent upholding the special prosecutor law in that circuit. The 11th Circuit down there is not the D.C. Circuit. So many of these cases have been decided in the D.C. Circuit. So this sounds a little inside baseball, but it's really important for people to understand. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case which involves Special Prosecutor Jaworski, who was prosecuted Nixon. He was not the Attorney General. He was someone who was picked as the special prosecutor. One of the issues in the case was him as special prosecutor and wanting to get records and taking other actions against Nixon. And the U.S. Supreme Court said unanimously in a decision written by Chief Justice Berger, who was appointed by Nixon or chosen by Nixon, unanimously they said there was no problem with the special prosecutor. That's why people are just sort of, they're just amazed again by this Cannon ruling. Now, since then, the people have argued, well, it was just dictum in that case. It wasn't the real crucial issue in the case. Dictum is from Latin, something that is said. So the idea is that if a decision says, okay, this is very much like the situation where this court does X, and now a case comes up that involves X, and they say, well, that previous case was precedent because they said this is like where we do X. The idea was that this is like where we do X was not central to deciding the previous case. It was just something that was said. It was like a rumination or a reflection by the court that wasn't necessary to the decision. And so people in these later cases have argued it wasn't really necessary to the decision in that Jaworski and President Nixon case. And the D.C. Circuit has said, oh, yes, it was. So if it had been in the D.C. District Court, that trial judge would have had to follow not just the U.S. Supreme Court, but would have had to follow the D.C. Circuit, where the D.C. Circuit said a lot of people are running around arguing in some of these cases, like in the Lawrence Walsh prosecution. He was the one who went after Iran-Contra in the 80s regarding Reagan. It came up in that case. And yes, somebody came in like Trump did and argued it's just dictum. And guess what? We shot that down. So she would have been bound if she'd have been in the D.C. District Court. But she could write on a fairly open slate, she thought. And she could do something different from what the D.C. Circuit, a higher court. She couldn't have defied the higher court, the D.C. Circuit, even if she had that opinion about the U.S. Supreme Court. So that is why that when this case gets to the 11th Circuit, even if the 11th Circuit doesn't back up what the D.C. Circuit did, this case does go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, people say, well, look, after Dobbs, they don't follow any precedent. After the crazy thing they did in the Trump case just this term with presidential immunity, they carry water for Trump no matter where it takes them. But I don't believe that. I believe that this is so clear that there is the authorization in these statutes to appoint special prosecutor that the appointments of all the special prosecutors are fine and that she'll be reversed. And then the question, which is be very interesting, two questions. Number one, how fast will that happen? It can't happen in a week or two. And then will the U.S. Supreme Court take it and delay it like they did presidential immunity way into next year? That's a possibility. That is a possibility, especially if the 11th Circuit disagrees with the D.C. Circuit. I don't think they will. But the other thing which is interesting is, will they ask upon reversal, which I think is pretty inevitable in this case, that ultimately the federal courts will reverse canon on this. Will they say that now they should pick a new judge as part of the remedy, that when they send the case back, as I think they will, and tell her, no, you got this wrong, the special prosecutor can prosecute this case in the Southern District of Florida, will they send the case back to her? And the hard part for Jack Smith is, what's the expression? If you go for the king, don't just wound him. If you go for the federal judge who's overseeing your case and say that she's biased and can't give us a fair trial, don't lose that argument in the higher courts and land right back in front of her. People think that no matter how federal judges are supposed to be completely unemotional, that you might run the risk of someone being emotional. You said you should ding her off the case. She's totally unfair and biased. And then you end up, oh, hello, is it Justice Cannon? No. I mean, we're still calling you Judge Cannon. Judge Cannon, hi, we're back here. You were wrong on the decision, but we're back here, because she's already made menacing sounds toward Jack Smith.
Well, she cited Thomas's opinion 3 times in knocking out Jack Smith. And
let me say this really quick. That was just a concurring opinion. Nobody joined Thomas. Thomas was all out by himself saying, I agree with these folks on presidential immunity. And let me say, an additional reason why I do is because I don't think that the special prosecutor should be looked at. I think there are real issues, notwithstanding what the court unanimously held in Nixon. But nobody joined him. Not Alito, not anybody else joined that. So the idea that he gave her some rope, he only gave her rope because she wanted to find that rope. But, you and I have talked about the fact that that case is kind of going nowhere before the time that matters. It's going nowhere except now banging around the appellate courts.
Let me ask you a legal question related to the venue.
Before the election. It's going nowhere before the election. I'm sorry. I understand.
The delay was deliberate for that reason. Could you, as a special counsel, pull the case from that court jurisdiction and actually move it to Washington?
Well, one of the interesting things, and I don't think Merrick Garland wants to do this, okay? Merrick Garland, I haven't researched it, in detail. But I wondered when I read the decision if Merrick Garland could have just said, look, we're appealing that. We think you're wrong. But let's assume for a second that you're right and there is no special prosecutor who can handle this. I can handle this. I'm the Attorney General, okay? And so I am going to bring these charges, and I'm going to bring them in Washington, D.C. So Merrick Garland and his staff will bring these charges. And now the courts they would appeal that, and they would say, well, that's a violation of the special prosecutor law. But you think one of them must be right. If there's no valid special prosecutor law, that doesn't mean that the crime can't be prosecuted. It means that the delegation is improper, that the inferior officer, which is what Jack Smith is under the law, he's an inferior officer, that you cannot give that much power or delegate to an inferior officer, which means, okay, it goes to the superior officer. Who's the superior officer? The Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland. Was he approved by the Senate? Yes, he was confirmed by the Senate. Now, to answer your question about Hunter Biden's an unusual situation, because one of the arguments is that whoever's going to be the special prosecutor has to be confirmed by the Senate. And they take a lot of people from outside government, Mark, and make them the special prosecutor. This Jack Smith was from outside government. At the time he was picked, Mueller was from outside government. And that's actually been the norm. It makes it look more independent, more like the administration's not doing it to either favor a friend or to railroad a foe, to have this independent person from outside the government. But then you have the situation where they haven't been confirmed by the Senate. The interesting thing about this U.S. attorney in Maryland was he was confirmed by the Senate. He was simply kept on by Biden after being confirmed by the Senate. So that would present a different legal.
Yeah, he falls into a different category then, you're saying. Yeah.
Maybe. And then his authority was he was made from being the U.S. attorney to being special counsel. So I suppose the remedy there might be you would carve out what he did as special counsel. You would say, okay, the actions that he took as U.S. attorney, they were fine if the reason for having questions about that law was the person hadn't been Senate confirmed. He not only was Senate confirmed, but he was still in the job for which the Senate confirmed him, U.S. attorney for the District of Delaware. That would be, at the end of the day, if Biden withdraws and another candidate takes up the Democratic mantle for president, or if whatever happens then, or whatever happens in November, the speed at which the Republicans will lose interest in Hunter Biden will shock you, because no one ever cared about Hunter Biden except as a way to try to flog his father, right?
Yeah, it's true. The laptop is mentioned prominently at the RNC, but you're right. If Biden is no longer politically relevant, then Hunter is no longer politically relevant either. And I'll just remind everybody, and because I thought it was absolutely genius the way you explained it when you did, that David Katz, as Katzadamus in his prediction mode, predicts that there is every bit of indication that Hunter Biden will get the pardon. There's just, as I recall, you laid it out so well. Like that would be everything that Hunter's done, all of the moves they've made illegally, everything would suggest that he believes that in the end there'll be a pardon. And it makes total sense that he would be pardoned, right?
Just as I think Trump would pardon one of his kids if the shoe were on the other foot. I think with the the power to do that, and I don't think that the country would chastise it. I think that they would think a loving father, really, what's he going to do? And it's not like he murdered somebody. It's not like he is still on drugs. He's apparently clean and sober. We had that celebration. J.D. Vance, first he trashes his mom, I guess, in the book. Then he trashes her on the stage. Then he says, oh, there she is. There she is. 10 years clean and sober. Well, how about the fact that Hunter's been clean and sober for quite a few years, too? If we want to really make, a difference between people who still have that problem and people who've, gotten themselves clean and sober, that describes not only J.D. Vance's mom, if it's true, but it certainly describes Hunter Biden, who everyone agrees has been clean and sober for several years, quite a few years now.
The politics of it are simple. If Biden were to win, let's just leave aside all the controversy, but if he were to win, then you pay no political price for pardoning your son. If you're to lose, then you pay no political price for pardoning your son, because you're no longer going to be president within a couple of months, and so you may as well just pardon him. So and then you add to that the stuff that David was talking about, which is a parent and a child who's now cleaned up his life. I want to ask you quickly
real quick, Mark. One case is about a gun that Hunter never used in any improper, bad way, and it was discarded 2 weeks later. The other case is about income tax, which, in defense of the pardon, I'm sure it would be stated that all the money was repaid. Now, not everybody has a financial angel like Hunter Biden did, who repaid all the money. But the reality is it's an unusual federal income tax case where all the money, including interest and penalties, was paid to the IRS.
I want to quickly, before we wrap up, ask you about something that is huge, and it relates to the Justice Department and the January 6th obstruction charges and the retooling of plea deals for rioters after the Supreme Court ruling. So the Supreme Court narrowed how the Justice Department can pursue obstruction charges against January 6 rioters. Federal prosecutors now are beginning to offer retooled plea deals or dropping that specific charge against members of the mob that attacked the U.S. Capitol. Remember, just to remind everybody, the justices essentially really narrowed what obstruction is. So without getting too much into the weeds, because of that, the Justice Department is reorganizing the plea deals that they are offering to, the alleged members of the Proud Boys and others who are involved in J6. Can you speak about this? Because it's a lot of people involved.
Well, this statute was passed after the Enron fiasco. and it had to do with people who destroyed records. They could be digital records or they could be paper records. So the paradigm was somebody calls you up and says, oh my God, the feds are coming in. They're going to grab all the accounting records, and you push delete. You've now destroyed those records. You've obstructed justice by destroying those digital records. Or the old style thing where, as soon as Elliot Ness and the Untouchables were about to smash down the door, all of the records of liquor transactions were on flash paper, and all the flash paper would go up in a fire. Those were the paradigms. And so the question was, did those marauders at the Capitol, with all the awful things that they had done, Mark, were they about destroying papers? Were they about destroying records? Some of them were. Trump himself seems to have been about that. And that's why those charges against Trump may stand, because they wanted to destroy those physical certifications. Maybe they were going to grab those boxes and burn them, or do something, hide them, take them out of there. And that certainly would have been the Enron conduct. But the people who just marauded and screamed and waved Confederate flags and stuff like that, well, as fate would have it, the guy who waved the Confederate flag, that we've all seen that person, the Confederate flag waving, he was apparently only convicted or only charged with this obstruction statute. But the statute of limitations has not run, so they'll find something else to charge him with, Mark. And many of them, they'll find something else to charge them with. So they'll say to some of them, look, you've already agreed to a 2-year sentence, and it's going to be made up by the obstruction, and it's going to be made up by some other charges which are not in any jeopardy after that Supreme Court decision. So let's say you were going to get 24 months. Your attorney's a genius. The system is favoring you. And so 21 months, here's your big chance. You get the benefit of the Supreme Court decision. We're going to take out the obstruction. We're going to give you 21 months. You used to be willing to take 24 months. The guy will take 21 months. That's great. The guy who that's all he's charged with, if he won't take a deal, that guy may go to trial. He may get charged with something else. So they think there's only, I think, dozens of people who are actually affected by this. The newspaper said there were something like 250 of these marauders, of these trespassers who have that charge against them. So that's the bottom line, is that charge is no good as a standalone charge. If that's all they have, the Department of Justice is in trouble against that defendant, unless they can prove that that person really did intend to destroy some records, like they were going to try to destroy the certifications. If they just wanted to, pee on someone's desk and scream and yell, and that's really all that they have, the obstruction wouldn't fit.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, only 17 people, less than 2% of the roughly 1,400 Capitol riot defendants who were convicted of the obstruction charge and weren't convicted of other felonies. Defendants already convicted of the charge, just noticing here, the Justice Department says that 130 people have been convicted and sentenced for obstructing an official proceeding, though more than half of those people were also convicted of additional felonies. So even if you carve out that, there are additional felonies involved.
And there may be some, Mark, their lawyers didn't raise it. And this is why you have to be very diligent when you're a criminal defense attorney. And sometimes you have to make a record and you have to say, Your Honor, we're challenging this. And the judge may say, yeah, you're wasting a lot of time. Okay, but no, Your Honor, I need to put this on the record. You're always seeing that with defense lawyers. You're seeing that in lawyer shows. And no, I need to put this on the record. And one of the reasons is because what you don't complain about in the trial court, you can't appeal that you didn't get the ruling in the appellate court. You have to preserve your objection. You have to make your record in the trial court. So there may be some people who didn't see this issue, didn't make it. They may argue that their attorneys were ineffective by not seeing it. I don't know. I don't think that's a winner, because the Department of Justice officials didn't see it, right? They put all their eggs in this basket for some of the defendants, not many, but in some instances, I think they did put their eggs in the basket. There'll be a few people who probably will get a quote windfall, but they've been dragged through the, it depends how you look at them. So you can look at them as some of them sort of dragged through the system. They were overzealous. Some of them, were an army that was willing to stage a coup, and they were underpunished, really, given what they were willing to do. They were willing to, basically to have a coup and dress in military fatigues and push those, the way that they treated those police officers there, how many they injured, several were killed. Let's never minimize how violent some of them were and how close they came, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it really did almost work. It really did almost work. I have.
Vance said he would not sign. Vance says I would have sent it back to the states. Vance said I would have sent it back to the states. Which, if you really think that our democracy is at stake, if you really think that, 4 years ago, 4.5 years from now, if Trump and Vance are in office and a Democrat wins, they won't count the votes. That certainly concentrates my thinking about what the Democrats ought to win now. Like maybe they should have a stop Trump team. That I haven't heard this from a lot of people, that maybe they agree to serve only one term, the president and vice president. And then you can have Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom duke it out in 4.5 years, but somehow stop Trump. If you really believe our democracy is at stake, if you really believe they won't count the vote fairly in 4.5 years, what's the point of being the nominee in 4.5 years if you're Newsom or Harris? If you really believe that this is the end of democracy if Trump and Vance get in there and they won't count the votes, let's win now. Let's not wait 4.5 years and think they're going to count the vote fairly then.
And people are asking, I guess, what your. It's interesting. You just shared some thoughts on the election, and I think that pretty much covers it. I know that there's a lot going on today. There's a push on the part of the former president Obama to speak to Biden and suggest that he read these tea leaves. But I don't know if that's going to be sufficient. Meantime,
I read, Mark, I read that there are 4 candidates who poll 5 points better than Kamala Harris. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a pollster.
I did that story right before you came on, actually, last hour. And
but if that's true, Mark, if that's true that there are 4 candidates who poll 5 points better against Trump and Vance, I think you've got to concentrate your mind, right, and just think, how much is it worth to win? How much is it worth to put out a ticket that polls 5 points better? Now, they may not poll 5 points better in a month,
right.
But in it to win it. In it to win it. If you really believe Trump and Vance are what a lot of people think that they are, this huge threat to democracy, to the environment, to stacking the Supreme Court even more, getting Thomas to quit and put Cannon on there or somebody like that. Sotomayor's health may not be that great. If you think that those are the stakes, the environment, our justice system, the rule of law, corruption, like everywhere, not counting the vote, if the Democrats would prevail next time, then put somebody in there right now. Put the 2 people who are going to run the best and then fight it all out in 4 years, Newsom and Kamala Harris. I'd love to see it. Have these 2 just serve for 1 term. Make them make a commitment. We're here to stop Trump, and that's all we're here for. We're patriots. They talk about this guy, Mark Kelly. I think he's an astronaut. I don't know a lot about him.
He leads the pack.
Whitmer.
Yeah, he leads the pack. So,
okay, Mark.
Yeah, I don't know. I love his name.
I
met him once.
I'm going back to just legal commentary, but
okay,
my God, it's been
that's
such
it.
a
We'll
week.
let you go with your legal commentary.
I don't live on an island. I don't live on a legal island, Kim, right? We don't live on an island. It's just legal cases.
I don't know how up you are on campaign law, but is it true that all the monies donated to the Biden-Harris campaign can't be rolled back to the DNC and put toward another candidate? Is that the way you understand it?
I read something that it legally can be transferred as long as it's done properly by lawyers who know what they're doing. So you can take it from this and you can put it into a PAC, and the PAC can have certain objectives. I think the reality is that you can use the money for those purposes. Trump puts half the money in his pocket or gives it to lawyers. I mean, don't do something like that. Do something that's legal. But I think there are legal ways. But it seems like some of the major donors don't want to even take those chances. They want to keep the money in their pocket until they see somebody who polls well and who can beat Trump and Vance. And why shouldn't they feel that way? They're in it to win it. Yeah.
All right. I will. It will take lawyers, but they can jackhammer that money out. But it'll take lawyers to do it. And he's my favorite lawyer. You're looking at him right now, David Katz, legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, now the defense attorney. Whose prediction, Trevor Starr in Hollywood, do you trust more, Katz or Mr. Predicto? Well, Katz is my guy, but I mean, Mr. Predicto is our latest. And Mr. Predicto, we can ask, will there be a change top of ticket for the Democrats?
It is is a strong possibility.
It's a strong possibility. So that's Mr. Predictable.
Mark,
But again,
this is like when they made the grandmasters of chess play against, what was it, Watson, and IBM
right.
computer would beat them. I have to go up against. I got every single U.S. Supreme Court decision right that we talked about last term, and now I got to go up against Mr. Predicto. I'll take any competition. I don't shy from the competition, even with your machine, Mark.
I love it. That's our guy, David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.